Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the Canon RF45mm f1.2. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. For all of you who are back to Kevin Deal Photography, welcome back. And for all of you where this is your first time here, at the beginning of every episode, I ask for donations to BIG, which is an organization that helps intellectually disabled adults adapt to jobs in the real world. But to the subject of today's episode, it's been a while since I've reviewed a Canon lens on this channel, mainly because I already bought the ones I wanted. Canon has a history of releasing some pretty unique lenses for the RF platform. The 28-70 f2 comes to mind. So does the RF24-105 f2.8. All fantastic flagship lenses, but for non-L users, they haven't really had a seat at the table until recently, and only with zooms. They came out with a 28-70 f2.8 and a 16-28 f2.8. All fantastic, but for prime users who don't want L lenses, you still have kind of your standard run-of-the-mill 1.8 and 2.8 lenses. But then Canon announced a 45mm f1.2 for under $500, and that grabbed my attention. I already own the RF 16mm f2.8, 28mm f2.8, and the 35mm f1.8 IS macro. I love traveling with those lenses because they're compact, lightweight, and pretty good optically. I have the nifty 50 f1.8, which is small and decent, but truth be told, it's my least favorite non-L RF lens. So if you told me there was a lens only 5mm wider, roughly the same size as the 35mm f1.8, decently light, but with a maximum aperture of f1.2, I'd happily trade a little size for more light and more subject isolation. So here it is, the Canon RF 45mm f1.2. It's an intriguing lens, and I can't help but wonder if this is Canon's way of saying, we're not opening up the RF mount to full-frame third-party companies because we're going to capture that market ourselves with fast, affordable lenses. Now, you might look at the $469 price tag and say, that's not budget, but show me another full-frame, mirrorless, first-party f1.2 lens for under $500. Honestly, I can't think of a single modern full-frame, first-party 1.2 lens that's under $2,000. Fuji makes some, and Viltrox makes 1.2 lenses for Fuji and Sony, but those are for APS-C bodies. They use less glass and fewer materials. So the fact that Canon hit this price point for a full-frame lens is truly unprecedented. But how good is this lens? That's exactly what we're going to find out in today's episode. Now, I also own the RF50mm f1.2, which is close enough in focal length and matches in maximum aperture, and I know a lot of you watching are curious how this budget 1.2 lens stacks up against a flagship 1.2 lens. How close does it get? I expect the 50mm L to win pretty handily, but maybe this 45mm will surprise us. On the flip side, I'll bet many of you watching today's episode own the nifty 50 and you're wondering if you should trade up to this 45 and take advantage of what we all hope is that buttery smooth bokeh that good 1.2 lenses are known for. I'll do a comparison between the 45 and nifty 50, and you can all look at the images and judge for yourself. You can also see how the differences are between 45 and 50, and then roughly the one-stop difference in maximum aperture. And just for fun, I'm also going to throw in my RF28-70 f2 at 45mm for comparison because it's a $3,000 lens. It can also be shot at 45mm, and why not? I'll give you my honest take on this lens, and it's the perfect time to disclose that I was not given this lens by Canon. I bought it with my own money, and my first impressions of this lens is that it's pretty much run-of-the-mill in build quality versus all the other non-L lenses. And for those of you wondering, it does not come with a lens hood. We'll address that in the pros and cons. But let's move forward. We're going to test this RF45mm f1.2 in a variety of real-world scenarios throughout this episode. By the end, you'll have a solid idea whether or not this lens is worth picking up or whether or not you should pass on it. But before we get started, let's talk about the specs. The Canon RF45mm f1.2 STM lens is a lens for the Canon RF full frame system. It has an aperture range of f1.2 to f16. It has an angle of view of 51 degrees. It has a minimum focusing distance of 1.5 feet or 45 centimeters. It has a magnification of 0.13. Its optical design is 9 elements and 7 groups, and it has 9 rounded aperture blades. This lens is not image stabilized. It has a front filter thread size of 67 millimeters. Its dimensions are 3.1 by 3 inches or 78 by 75 millimeters. It comes in at a weight of 12.2 ounces or 346 grams, and it comes in at a street price of $469 US. All right, so I have a studio session today. Got this 45mm 1.2, but I'm gonna put this 45 through its paces. I'm gonna test it versus the 51.2. Yeah, we're gonna be doing mainly stop down because we're in a black studio, a black box studio, but I still wanna see how sharp this is. I wanna see how it works on general use. And of course, we'll shoot it at 1.2 later in today's episode, but without further ado, let's do some studio work on this 45mm f1.2. Okay, so for stills in the studio, video, a mix of studio lighting and natural lighting, I'd have to say the 45 1.2 did a fantastic job. Here's a comparison shot between the 45 and the flagship 51.2. Both look really awesome. It's holding up pretty well. Now let's go up the road and shoot some street photography in downtown Dallas. All right, so I'm gonna shoot a little bit of street photography with this guy. 35 and 50 are my favorite two focal lengths to shoot street photography with, and 45 puts you smack dab in the middle. Now, I know a lot of you think you need IBIS. I think that people overrate how often they actually need IBIS. Yes, it does have its uses, especially for videography, but you know, if it's a situation where you can't hold still and you're shooting something that's moving, chances are it can't hold still. And we did take a lot of great pictures as a society before we had IBIS. So I'm gonna use this 45 1.2 on my R8, which is a fantastic camera. It's very light, it has a really good compact feel, and I think 1.2 and no IBIS, I think we're gonna get some pretty sharp pictures, but I gotta go shoot here in downtown Dallas and actually find out. So let's see what kind of shots we can get. My buddy Andrew and I shot some street photography in downtown Dallas. I even showed off the fact that even though the lens doesn't have IS and my camera doesn't have IBIS, you can absolutely shoot some sharp shots at lower shutter speeds. All right, for those of you who care with image quality, a little bit of vignetting on the sky, sun stars are pretty cool. But let's go back to my YouTube studio and let's do some file comparisons. Okay, so I have two files here. The one on the left was shot with the 45 1.2 at 1.2, and the one on the right was shot at 50mm f1.2 as well. Same setting, same ISO, same shutter speed, all that. So as we zoom in, let's see how sharp these files are. And it's pretty obvious that the one on the right is definitely sharper than the one on the left, and it's 5 or 6 times more expensive, so maybe not a surprise, but that is what you get with a $500 lens versus a $2,500 lens. So still a good performance on the left, but if you were hoping that the 45 1.2 was going to be in the neighborhood of the 50 1.2, I regret to tell you that is not the case. So let's see other parts of this image and see what we get. As I move up here on the bokeh, as you zoom in, you can definitely see more green on the 45mm, and that green is less present. That's what you get when you spend almost $3,000. Let's check out some stuff over here. Okay, you definitely get a little bit more purple and green here on the 45mm 1.2, tiny bit here on the 50 1.2, but the differences are obvious. So when you look at these two files, it's pretty obvious that the 50mm 1.2 does outperform the 45, but the 45, that's still a solid job for a sub $500 lens. For those of you who really want to get into the weeds on how this 45mm compares to more expensive lenses, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can check out the raw files. Okay, for our next test, we're going to do a bokeh comparison really quickly. On the left, you see the 45mm f1.2 at 1.2. On the right, you see the 50 1.8. I may have slightly missed focus on the 45 shot, but nonetheless, you can see the bokeh on those Christmas lights, and it'll tell you everything that you need to know as far as whether or not you like the bokeh. You can definitely see some green fringing here, and it's a little bit present as well on that 50 1.8. Okay, now we're going to compare the 45mm f1.2 at 1.2 to the 28-70 f2 at f2, because that's as bright as it gets. And I got kind of close. I got to 47mm, so it's a little off, but you can definitely see the bokeh balls are a little smaller on the one on the right, which is the 28-70. But man, for a $3,000 lens, that's a zoom lens. That's actually a pretty good performance for that 28-70. Definitely bigger bokeh balls, but you can see there's no green fringing here on these because it's a much more expensive optic. Okay, so for the last example, I'm going to show you the 45 1.2 versus the 50 1.2 at 1.2. And as you zoom in, you can definitely see that they have football-shaped bokeh. The bokeh on the left definitely has more green fringing. The bokeh on the right appears to have some slightly more onion rings. And so that's almost a $3,000 lens on the right after tax and a $500 lens on the left after tax. So I think that the bokeh on all of these is fantastic. They all create great subject isolation when shot wide open, but I know a lot of you care, so I went ahead and showed you some files. All right, so I've done a variety of projects ranging from studio portraiture to on-location portraiture to videography to general walk-around and street photography with this RF45mm 1.2 STM. I have a pretty good idea how I feel about it, both pros and cons, and like we do with every single review on this channel, we start off with the areas where I feel like they could have gotten things a little bit better. There's no weather sealing on this lens. In fact, while I haven't taken this lens apart, it feels about as stripped down as any Canon lens I've ever owned for the RF mount. Canon put some weather protection on their RF28-70 f2.8 and their RF16-28 2.8 lenses, which made it sound like Canon finally figured out that a 2-cent rubber gasket really isn't much to ask for on those $1,100 lenses. But it appears that was too much to ask for on this $469 lens, and that's a pretty big disappointment for me because 7 Artisans makes all metal lenses that I've reviewed for the Lumix L mount, and those lenses are only $299 I might add, and feature better weather protection than this 45mm f1.2. Speaking of things that probably cost no more than $1 to manufacture, plastic lens hoods. This lens doesn't come with one, and if you're experienced in shooting with non-L Canon lenses, you know how stingy Canon is when it comes to lens hoods. It doesn't have to be this way, but it is. If you're considering a lens hood, the ES73B is the model that is specifically made for this 45mm. It's $59, which is about 13% the cost of the lens itself. For a piece of plastic, to me, that's a ripoff. So I'll leave a link in the description below where you can buy one, but I won't be getting one. I'll just do what I did with my 35mm and 16mm STM lenses, and I'll wait until JJC comes out with a third-party lens hood for 1/3 the price. If you're hoping Canon will eventually open up the RF full-frame mount to third-party autofocus lenses, I think this lens might be Canon's way of saying that's not happening anytime soon. This is purely speculation on my part, of course, but it feels like Canon has decided they'd rather capture the sub-$500 market themselves than invite companies like Sigma or Tamron to the party. And of course, that is their prerogative. That said, it becomes less of an issue if Canon continues down this path and releases more affordable f1.2 primes in the near future. If you're looking for image stabilization, this lens doesn't have any. Now, I question how much you actually need it, and I've gone on record saying that people overrate how much they think they need image stabilization. But this lens does not come with it, so that may be a con to you. And my guess is that a lot of you are purchasing this lens to regularly shoot it at f1.2. As someone who owns several f1.2 lenses, it's time for me to pass on some wisdom to those of you who are just getting into your first 1.2 lens with this 45mm. f1.2 is incredibly bright. If you plan on using this lens in the middle of the day, outdoors, on a sunny day, it's often brighter than the maximum shutter speed when using a mechanical shutter. Most Canon cameras have a maximum shutter speed of either 1/4000th or 1/8000th of a second, and often that isn't enough. So you have two options. One is to use your electronic shutter, which all of your cameras should have, and they usually go up to 1/16,000th of a second or even faster. That will likely be enough, but keep in mind that electronic shutter also has its drawbacks, especially if you're shooting fast, laterally moving objects. The other alternative is to use a neutral density filter, and that's typically what I do because I shoot off-camera flash, and I like to keep my shutter speed under my camera's sync speed when I can, because my flash is more consistent and efficient when I'm not using HSS. So, depending on your situation, you may end up needing to purchase a 67mm neutral density filter for your 45mm f1.2, which for a good one will definitely be north of $50 and could easily run you over $100. I just wanted to disclose that potential extra cost up front because it might be a con for those of you who shoot at f1.2 in bright conditions. I have to do this as well for my $2,000 plus f1.2 lenses. It's just an extra cost of owning a f1.2 maximum aperture lens. Now the final con is a fair one. It doesn't really bother me, but it might bother some of you. This lens simply doesn't resolve as well on my higher resolution bodies. You only really notice it when you're zoomed way in, and realistically, most people aren't viewing images at 400% with their face pressed up to a screen or a print. So in practice, it probably won't matter for most use cases. That said, the Canon L lenses objectively resolved better. Wide open, this lens shows noticeable green and purple fringing, which is consistent with my experience using other non-L RF lenses like the RF45mm f1.8 macro IS. It's pretty much par for the course at this level. If that kind of thing bothers you, you'll need to step up to Canon's flagship L glass. For me, it wasn't a deal breaker at all, but it's still worth mentioning because it could be a con depending on your expectations and how you shoot. That's really it for the cons. None of these are deal breakers for a 1.2 full frame first party lens that comes in at under $500. Now, let's talk about the pros of this lens. Right off the bat, the size and the weight. It's just over 12 ounces. For a 1.2 full frame lens, I cannot stress how light this is. Even though it's a little longer and a little bit heavier than my 35mm f1.8 macro, I can't really tell the difference between the two when they're mounted on my camera body. So if you own the 35mm 1.8 macro, put that on your camera right now, and that's about how it feels owning the 45 1.2. Staying on the subject of size, it's great that Canon was able to deliver a full-frame f1.2 lens with a very manageable and common 67mm front filter thread. For perspective, on my Fuji X system, which uses a smaller APS-C sensor, most of my f1.2 lenses require 77mm filters. So the fact that Canon pulled this off on a larger full-frame sensor while keeping the filter thread 10mm smaller than my APS-C f1.2 lenses is nothing short of impressive. Even though the lens isn't weather sealed, I still took it out in a light drizzle on my non-weather sealed R8, and they both held up just fine in the elements. So if you find yourself in a downpour with this lens, you'll probably be just fine if you exercise common sense and try to keep the lens reasonably covered. I found the STM motor to be acceptably fast. Now, some of that is Canon's fast autofocus, which is like a cheat code, but the motor was pretty quiet and fast, and even though a lot of you aren't looking at this guy for video work, you could absolutely use it for that purpose. None of that is a surprise, as Canon tends to have the best autofocus in the business. Like all Canon lenses, the RF45mm features a control ring, so if you want to control your aperture, you could do that. Having owned Canon RF glass for the better part of 6 years, I've settled on assigning my control rings to my autofocus area. Now let's talk about image quality, which to me is a pro. Is it complicated? Sure, but it depends on what your goals are. Yes, this lens is flawed, and we covered that in the cons, but because of its price point, image quality has to also land under the pros. I've used this lens on professional work. The clients, they were happy. I was happy. The quirks of this lens are absolutely manageable. It's a character lens. If you gravitate toward the character, you're going to love it. Overall, this lens is pretty sharp, wide open. The subject separation is excellent. The quirks really only rear their ugly heads when you're way zoomed in. Since that's not how I enjoy photography, I think the image quality of this lens is impressive, especially for its size, weight, and price. And that leads me to my last point, value. You're getting an f1.2 lens that takes great images, has incredibly fast autofocus, and comes with a control ring, all for $469 US. So what are my final thoughts on this lens? For someone like me who already owns the flagship f1.2 glass, this is the lens I'll be taking on vacation while those big L lenses stay at home. It's absolutely good enough for situations where I don't feel like packing heavy, expensive glass, and as I get older, those situations are becoming more frequent. The non-L RF lenses have reached a level of quality where I really only pull out something like my RF50mm f1.2 when I'm being hired for professional work. If I'm traveling, going to Europe, or just shooting for myself, I won't think twice about it. This 45mm f1.2 delivers the look I want in a much smaller and lighter package. So if you find yourself in a similar position, maybe you already own Canon's flagship lenses but want to save a significant amount of size and weight without giving up that f1.2 look, I can confidently recommend picking this lens up. Now, for those of you who are looking at this as your primary f1.2 lens because the flagship L glass feels like it's out of reach, go ahead and just buy this lens. You can shoot professional jobs with it right away. I did, and so can you. Start with this lens, build your portfolio, make your money, and if down the road you feel like you truly need the 50mm f1.2, you can pick it up when the budget allows. Your clients aren't going to zoom in at f1.2 and ask about a hint of green fringing. At the end of the day, photographers and Facebook groups are the only people who care about that kind of stuff. What I hope this lens represents is the beginning of a budget-friendly Canon 1.2 prime lineup, not just a one-off release. Will we eventually see a budget 85mm f1.2, maybe even a budget 35mm f1.2 down the road? It's hard to say, especially since Canon hasn't even released a flagship 35mm f1.2 at the time of this recording. But if Canon has no intention of opening the full-frame RF mount to third-party autofocus lenses, then pursuing these kinds of fast, affordable primes themselves would absolutely be the right move for their customers. Whether Canon commits to building out this lineup or lets this lens stand alone remains to be seen. Only time will tell. If you're interested in picking up the Canon RF45mm f1.2, I'll leave a link in the description below. That does it for today's episode. What did you think of my review of the Canon RF45mm f1.2? Tell me about it in the comments below. Did you pick one up? What do you think about it? Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you're a fan of this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.